This guy wanted to kill her. I'm going to take you out on a kayak in these rough seas. Yeah, your foot's broken. We have no spray skirts, no bailer. I didn't bring life jackets, but whatever, let's try it. Then, hey, let's go camping on this island. That'll be fun. Oh, and you wake up in the morning. Oh, this place could have been bombed. I could have been blown to smithereens in the night. For all this guy cares. He didn't care. Wow, that's kind of cool, isn't it? We camped on a Navy bombing site. Wow. And then that very afternoon, he's like, hey, why don't you get up on top of my Jeep and I'll spin it around real fast, see if you can hold on. I don't know what's going to happen if you let go, but let's find out. So this guy needs to be strangled. Hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Chair Denise, and today we're going to begin Ask Not. This is the book that was written about the Kennedys. I've taken the dust jacket off just because it makes a lot of noise when I read. It kind of like rustles. So taking the dust jacket off, but you'll recognize it as this book right here. It's Ask Not and the Women That the Kennedy Men Destroyed. Now, I've read the book. I read it while I was at the beach, and it is certainly a bombshell of a book because it presents this information, much of it brand new, to audiences that are very familiar with the Kennedys. It presents this information from a vantage point that is new to us in that the Kennedys are certainly not the heroines of the story. If anything, they are the devils. And the women are very victimized in these stories, many times rightfully described as victims. But when I was reading this book, well, I certainly enjoyed the new vantage point. I've never thought that the Kennedys were the winners that Americans had been led to believe that they were. I never believed that. I always knew there was something more going on. And I'm not saying that that is new to me. I think there's a lot of people who have thought, is it a Kennedy curse, or are you guys living in a way that writes the script for disaster? Anyway, I think that a lot of people have shared my questions about what's truly going on in that family. I just thought to myself, there's something going on here and I don't know what it is. And this is the book that tells us, well, we always wondered what is happening. But I will say that in the author's pursuit of describing the men as the treacherous monsters that many times they were, she does that at the expense of telling the truth about the women. And I got to the point by the end of the book where I thought, I totally champion the idea that we're getting a true and honest history about the men and what they did to the women in their lives. I hate it. But I feel sometimes that she did that at the exclusion of telling the truth about what the women were up to. Because a lot of these women had severe substance abuse problems, were unable to take care of their children, rage, anger, like very destructive personalities. And we get a real gloss over of that. It's, yeah, they were drug addicts. Yeah, they were, out of control, raging at their family, scaring the daylights out of their kids. But, can you blame them? Look at who they were married to, which is the exact argument that she hated so much because the Kennedy men often use that argument. Well, of course I'm having all these affairs. Look who I'm married to. So I'm bothered by the fact that we can't do better on an argument. Could we write a book about the fact that everybody is human and no one was trying very hard in these scenarios? Everyone was hedonistically going after their own desires and wondering why it wasn't working? That would be an honest book. So while I totally am going to read this book, and while we're going to have lots of conversations about what we're going to read, I have to honestly tell you that I was a little bit bothered by how frequently we got a real brush over of some of the faults of the women involved. Because I have a problem with that being called a history. It's not a history if we have to band-aid and bandage over some of the truth because we've got to get our point across that these men are terrible. The men were terrible. And I will say that I think a lot of the problems the women had were certainly encouraged by the infidelities that their husbands were having, the dismissal, sometimes just the outright ugliness that their husbands treated them with. I'm not saying that there's no relationship between that. I'm just saying that to be an honest journalist, you can't categorically tell me like, bam, 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 look how terrible these men are. And then for relatively equal struggles that the women are having, we give them a pass. I don't like that. But I will say that the first story that we're going to start with, about Carolyn Bessette, we do get less of that. So initially, when I was reading the story, because the first story we hear about is the wife of John Jr., the first time I read the book and their story, I initially thought, oh, is this just going to be where we like beat up the men but then act like women are angels? Because again, the men deserve to be called out 1,000%. These people have been covered by the media for decades. So I'm fine with us saying what's really going on with the men. But I don't like the narrative like, men are monsters and women are angels. That's not true, And so, let's not perpetrate that lie just to, make our point. But the first story that I read about Carolyn Bessette, she definitely pulls back the curtain on Carolyn's behavior and how she was a very complicated, complex individual that was a little out of control sometimes. So my initial thought was, oh, okay, good. We're getting honesty on both sides. She's going to be honest about the men, but she's also going to be honest about the women. But then we get to Jackie Kennedy, and I just feel like there was a lot of being like, well, she could do no wrong, and if it looks like she was, or if you kind of can't get why, she actually had this really complicated reason why, it's a really complicated intellectual reason why she was doing what she was doing. And I'm like, was she though? So you guys know I'm going to tell you what I think, and you guys let me know what you think in the comments. But anyway, I've talked long enough. Before we get started, I want to say that the way I'm going to read this book is different actually than the book is laid out. So you should know before we go into it that the book is not laid out in chronological order. It's not going to start at the beginning of the Kennedy family and make its arch over. Actually, the way the book is set up is little capsule chapters about the different women. So the first chapter is about Carolyn Bessette. But then later on, about 200 pages in the book, we get our second chapter about her. The way I'm going to do this series is we are going to do all the Carolyn material together. Then we're going to get to Jackie. We're going to do all the Jackie material together. Then we're going to get to Marilyn Monroe. We're going to do all the Marilyn material together. All the material about Joan Kennedy. All the material about Rose Kennedy. Everybody is going to get their own section in this series so that we're not, reading about Carolyn and then 14 episodes later we're going to hear about Carolyn again. I think that the way I'm going to structure it for you all is just to tell each individual's story as one, and then you can come back, and if you want to hear about the person again, it'll be easier to find the Carolyn story or the Jackie story or the Marilyn story. I think there's another reviewer out there right now who's doing the book the way I typically do a book. And so if you like that better, maybe that's where you should go. But I think this will be a better way to absorb the material. All right, let us get started. I've talked a long time, but I kind of just want to let you guys know what I thought we were getting into. This author she writes the way she would talk to you about this. So she writes very much as though she's giving you the dirt on something, like you and her met for coffee and she's telling you what she found out. So the tone of this is less intellectual and more like, girl, let me tell you what I found out, So I'm wondering sometimes if you'll be able to tell the difference between my tone, what I'm saying, what my opinion is, and what she's writing, because she writes very much in the way that I speak in an aside to you. So hopefully we can differentiate. I don't know. Let's just get into this. Enough of my talking. Also, if you could hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Okay. Carolyn Bessette. We begin at the beginning. She writes, the minute she said yes, she regretted it. Carolyn could say that about so much of her life recently, but nothing felt quite like this. She was going against her gut, trying to keep her husband happy, really trying to keep up appearances, their marriage at its most tenuous, by agreeing to fly with him in the small plane he was still learning to pilot to a Kennedy wedding on the Cape. His flying was a point of pride for him, and fear for her. I don't trust him. She said this to family members, friends, the waitress at their favorite restaurant in Martha's Vineyard. She didn't think her husband had the patience, the diligence, the attention span, and really the humility to be a good pilot, to know when he shouldn't get in the air. He was still a student, but he had so much hubris. He didn't take his training seriously. He hadn't banked nearly the hours in the air, in daylight and at night, to pilot alone. He'd break the rules, sneak in solo flights when he was supposed to have an instructor fly with him, but not one person admonished him or threatened to take away his training certificate. Nope, it was just John being a Kennedy. A rogue, a rebel like his father, risking his blood. That's going to be a theme. Everyone just lets these Kennedys off the hook, and I, for the life of me, can't figure out why. I really can't. So they were a big family politically. Had they ever done anything for you? Like, I don't understand why everyone was like, let's just give the Kennedys everything they want. Oh, the holy Kennedys. Exactly why, though? Like, truly. I don't get the legacy. I've never understood it. I know they're good-looking people. Is that really the only thing it takes? Apparently. To the Flight Academy, the bravest people in aviation, John wrote to his instructors, because people will only care where I got my training if I crash. John thought it was funny. Carolyn did not. John, unlike Carolyn, thought there was no way that he'd ever have an accident, even though he'd had a cast on his ankle for the past 6 weeks, having broken it in crash landing a contraption called a flying lawnmower. He'd needed surgery on the ankle. John's doctor had just removed the cast the day before, and even though John needed a cane to walk and would need months of physical therapy, he swore the doctor had cleared him to fly. Not likely. But John was so confident, overconfident as usual. Carolyn couldn't fully blame him. No one said no to John F. Kennedy Jr., heir to Camelot, the only living son of the beloved slain president with movie star looks and charm to match. America's prince, the media called him. And whenever John wanted to do something, to become a lawyer, start a magazine, hell, run for president of the United States, everybody knew that was coming, the answer was going to be yes. Sure, yeah, of course, Mr. Kennedy, and you know what? Let's start you at the top of your field. Sometimes Carolyn would say no to John just to say no, to habituate him to real life. It always stunned him. When they first started dating seriously, after he'd ghosted Carolyn, the formerly accommodating, easygoing Carolyn of a few years before, she recalibrated. She suddenly wasn't so available. She wasn't so understanding of his lateness, forgetfulness, entitlement. She was forcing him to realize that other people were important too. She stood up to him once. This was before everyone had cell phones. No way for her to reach John F. Kennedy Jr. as he sat in a darkening Broadway theater, all eyes on him and the empty seat next to him, to say that she had to work late. Carolyn expected John to be furious with her, but it only made him want her more. And Carolyn realized her superpower. She became the only woman in the world to tell John F. Kennedy Jr., no, not okay. Don't behave like that. I won't put up with that. Say you're sorry. Do better. Don't take me for granted. And he got off on it. There was a picture that went round when they were going public, Carolyn on a boat in a thong bikini, John bent down in front of her helping her with the wrap. That was their dynamic. Carolyn was the dominant, John the submissive. He liked to be bossed around by the women in his life, and Carolyn liked bossing him around. She got off on denigrating him, calling him a fag in front of friends, taunting him with the male model she kept on the back burner, her explosive temper keeping him unsure and on the edge. See, so we're not getting an angelic picture of Carolyn by any stretch of the imagination. And it was at this point that my spirit rallied, because I thought, okay, good, let's hear from both sides. She should have known that her power over him would be fleeting. He's under so much pressure, Carolyn's sister said. It was 1997, and John's magazine, George, barely 2 years old, had gone from being one of the most successful launches in industry history to a spectacular failure, teetering on the brink of insolvency. Worse, no one read it. John, as editor-in-chief and face of the magazine, not only didn't have the esteem of his publishing peers, he was laughingstock, called the worst thing anyone could call him, dumb. It was a label that had plagued him since he failed the bar exam twice in his 20s, an exam he never wanted to take, forced by his mother to pursue a respectable career in law. Tabloid headlines all over New York City screaming some variation of the same headline, "The hunk flunks." When he did finally pass, his mother having arranged special circumstances for his third test, and the esteemed Manhattan District Attorney Robert Morgenthau arranging a plum position for him, John's new colleagues were unimpressed. John would take his lunch hour shirtless in the park playing football. His first case was prosecuting a robber who'd fallen asleep while committing the act and was awakened by cops. JFK Jr., himbo. He was painfully aware of his reputation, but he didn't seem to realize how his narcissism played into it. George meant to upend that image, and was instead a failure on 3 fronts, commercially, critically, and as an intended triumph of public relations. One meant to give JFK Jr. the gravitas for a run for governor of New York or U.S. Senate. Do we just care? Not at all who runs for Senate. I mean, I'm getting it now that we don't care. I look around, and I'm like, I guess just anyone will do. But I wonder, after reading this book, I think this is the thing that, disturbs me. Was there a time when we cared who sat in public office for us? Was it just a hot 5 seconds in the late 1700s where we were like, let's care about our country? And then after that was just like, well, who can pay the most for this seat? Because I just feel like we don't care who we put before us. It's all just very reminiscent of the Israelites being like, give us a king, and then they got Saul, who, used and abused them, as was predicted. And I feel like that's how we do with our politicians. We don't call them kings, but we just want someone to worship, someone to sit up in front who's pretty. That would really be helpful if they could look nice. And then, if they're fun to watch, all's the better. But we don't care about their policy. And maybe that's how the Kennedys got as far as they did. The fact that anybody thought that JFK Jr. was going to make some kind of excellent politician, in what world? The most respectable satirical publication of the age had, within months of George's launch, put John on their cover, chin resting on his hand, brow furrowed as if in serious contemplation, and the headline said, "What will he think of next?" The piece that ran in Spy magazine mocked his professional failures, beginning with his first business idea, a quixotic attempt to sell handmade kayaks that would somehow be mass-produced. Surely they've got to have some kind of factory out there that does that, right? That was following an ill-thought-out rent-a-dog scheme, inspired by the people who stopped John all the time when he was walking his own dog. Surely there must be a market for that, right? And then somebody pointed out to him, well, not really. They're stopping you because it's you, not your dog they want to talk to. But the dog's a good excuse. Did you know that, John? And he's like, you learn something new every day. John had to concede that his friend Matt Brunman that pointed that out to him was probably right. He was on to the next idea, one far more glamorous, high-profile, and unexpected. A magazine. How hard, he asked, could that be? John and Matt enrolled in a 2-day course called How to Start Your Own Magazine. And despite their teachers' warnings, most upstarts fail and magazines about religion and politics are surefire losers, John decided to become the founder and editor-in-chief of a magazine that would mix politics and pop culture. How was unclear. But no one, not his mother, not his longtime friend Jan Wenner, the founder and editor-in-chief of Rolling Stone, and certainly not Carolyn, could talk him out of it. At his mother's request, her friend Joe Armstrong, a former ABC News exec and magazine publisher, tried to offer John advice. Go slow, John said. Keep your plans to yourself. Learn the answer to every possible question that you get in pitch meetings. Don't go in like a fool. You haven't thought about what they might ask you. Every single thing should be thought out, and you should have a really clear answer for it. John's like, whatever, I'll wing it. It's not a big deal. John sailed into those meetings with due diligence and met headwinds he'd never experienced or expected. Somebody was actually asking him a hard question. Actually, they weren't even hard questions, but he didn't even seem to think that anyone was going to do anything other than pat him on the back. We'll give you as much money as you need. You're Kennedy. We'll do whatever. One executive couldn't believe John's gall in asking for a $20 million investment without even being able to answer the most basic stuff, such as, who was the magazine's audience? What was the brand identity? Who would John hire to write? What stories would the magazine break? Who would make ideal profile subjects? Why would their as yet unnamed magazine be successful when political magazines by definition were small and lucky to break even? How would they attract advertisers once, let's face it, the novelty of being associated with JFK Jr. wore off? He didn't have answers to any of those. Those are some minor questions. Those aren't even big hitters, I don't know, it's going to be hard to figure that one out. I don't know, let me get, a think tank going to figure that out. What stories would the magazine break? Who do you want to write for your magazine? You don't know the answers to that? You don't want a magazine then. Carolyn knew all too well about the novelty wearing off. John was like Seinfeld's bubble boy, so coddled and spoiled that he didn't know what he sounded like to others. He could be prickly and impatient and something of a brat, really. John didn't live in the real world and never had. He lived on planet Kennedy, where he was king, and his main experience was a feedback loop of awe at his looks, his lineage, his fame, his politeness. He's so down to earth. Give him a gold star. That was a line on John, from waitresses to movie stars, paparazzi to presidents. But he wasn't down to earth. Not really. Anyone who knew him behind closed doors knew that. Even his close friend, Steve Gillian, an eminent historian, gave up trying to educate John on the realities of the Vietnam War and his father's backroom decision to escalate troop levels rather than, as post-assassination myth had it, end American involvement. Gillian had taught John, who'd previously failed a Vietnam seminar at Brown. Still, Gillian was shocked when John informed him that he, as the president's son, knew more about the war. The day after a tepid debate that saw Gillian sat down, John informed his former professor that one of his father's prime Vietnam advisors, his Secretary of Defense, had weighed in. I talked to Bob McNamara last night, John said. He said that you're completely wrong. Gillian let it slide. What was the point? John didn't know what he didn't know and was sure, as throughout his life, that others would take care of the details. Someone else will figure it out. It's not my problem. So, what if he was planning a political magazine devoid of a political point of view? That, he thought, would be its strength. What is this? A magazine about nothing? How can you have a political magazine and be like, I don't have a political point of view, but that's its strength? Boy, you better get your head up out of the... His mother herself, now a book editor, was doubtful. John, Jackie asked, is it going to be the Mad magazine of politics? By which she meant, are people going to laugh at it? At you? John has never shown the slightest interest in the magazine business before, Jackie told the journalist Ed Klein. And he has no experience in journalism. But her skepticism was John's fuel. No one doubted Jackie's intellect, or Sister Caroline's, and certainly not his father's. Why couldn't he be taken as seriously? Carolyn had tried to tell him, if that's what you want, treat other people and things with the respect you crave. But John's habit of being careless with his own things and those of others was his defining character trait. Responsibilities were for other people, not him. Why should he care? Somebody will replace it. I mean, not him, but somebody will. He rode around the city on his bicycle and never locked it up. He spent thousands of dollars replacing bike after bike. The carelessness. How hard would it be to buy a bike lock? Did he think people weren't going to steal it because it was his bike? Or was he just not bothered? He could just, tell a personal assistant to buy him another one. But the hassle of that, just keep the bike you have. When it came to his public image, however, John was nowhere near as thoughtless. He was always in the tabloids with his shirt off, running out of the surf, or playing touch football in Central Park, displaying his perfectly sculpted body. The truth was that John was a terrible athlete, totally uncoordinated. But he looked the part. But this bit right here is humiliating. I'm like, did you stop maturing when you were 12 years old? Because this is... I'm struggling to understand why any man would do this. Now, granted, I've never seen the interior of a male locker room. I don't know what goes on in there. I've heard some sordid stories. But this is just a weird move. The book says that at the gym, any gym, he'd strip off his towel after showering and slowly, pointedly examine his genitals. Why and what? Can you imagine walking past a guy who was inspecting it like he was going to find something there? This was well before the era of smartphones and social media, but John's peacocking was innate. He presented himself as just another guy. No at-home gym to avoid the hoi polloi, no request for a private shower or bathroom. Yet he was different, special, a rare specimen even among the protected class. No one would ever have guessed he'd taken so many risks, had come close to death so many times in his teens and 20s. No one would have believed that the kind, humble, gorgeous John Kennedy had a habit of putting others in danger too. Most often his closest friends and girlfriends. Speeding, swimming too far out into the ocean, driving recklessly onto sidewalks or while high on pot, skiing in whiteout conditions, acting like an expert in all sports when really he was just an amateur. There was little John wouldn't dare, and he bullied almost everyone in his life to be as wild as he was. Enter poor Christina. This girlfriend of his, where we're going to get a good bit about her in this chapter. He treated her like so much dirt. And the fact that she stood by him, and really, this goes for all the women. Who cares if this is a Kennedy? This person is a bastard. He's acting like a monster. You're so addicted to the idea of being married to a Kennedy that you're willing to throw your life into the pit of hell. And it's not like any of these women were love bombed initially and then saw a side. That's the thing that's so crazy. All of these people knew what they were getting into when they did it. And yet they all seem to think that being a Kennedy was so meaningful that it was all worth it. And my question is, why? What did you think happened on the Kennedy compound? Did you guys think that you were going up and down the ladder of heaven? I mean, what exactly do you think was going to happen to you once you became a Kennedy? It's all for naught while you're dating the person. It's all terrible. They're horrible. They're cheating on you. They hate you. But you think he's going to put a ing on your finger, you're going to be at the altar, and then suddenly you're going to be happy? Why would it get better when you're married, when you actually have some real stressors in your life? Okay, well, poor Christina, she really dodged a bullet, but not before he'd almost tried to kill her. The book says that he nearly killed his first serious girlfriend, Christina, at least 3 times. John had met her in high school. Christina was part of his social set, yet she was mesmerized by John's mother, by the palatial apartment at 1045th Avenue, by the gravitational pull this awkward yet beautiful boy exerted, and the unbelievable notion that he had chosen her. His emotional liability added an exquisite tension to their romance. His moods would darken instantaneously without warning. Don't talk to my mother. Why won't you walk with me in torrential rain? Call her Mrs. Onassis. My ex means nothing to me. Her? She's just some stupid actress. I've been bossed around by too many women. If you won't ski with me, then we'll just have to break up. When I die, I want it to be sudden, fast, boom. So, he's deranged. Now, the book says that Easter 1986, John's Aunt Lee had invited them to Mexico, but John had another idea, roughing it in Jamaica and kayaking in the open sea. Okay. John knew nothing about kayaking in the open sea, and neither did Christina, and this idea terrified her, but particularly because she had a terribly broken foot. She had badly broken her foot in February, and after a 6-hour operation, his cousin Anthony by her bedside all night, John sending flowers but otherwise unable to tear himself away from whatever he was doing, her doctor had warned her, nothing extreme. A shower, a bath, gentle swim in the pool, but nothing else. She was still on crutches. Kayaking was against the doctor's orders. John hadn't even been able to bring himself to look at Christina's foot, let alone hear about her pain. Telling other people to suck it up was his way of avoiding what made him uncomfortable. What a joy he must have been. Okay, also, just a side note. Have you ever been dating someone and been like, oh, you're having an emergency? I can't make it, but I'll send my cousin. What a weird family dynamic. I can't even begin to understand that. And what encouragement is the cousin to me? I don't want you. Where's my boyfriend? Anyway, even Jackie had tried to encourage Christina not to go. She told her about hurting her ankle years back when she was engaged to Jack and playing touch football trying to fit in with all these rambunctious Kennedys. That was the last time, Jackie said. But, as was John's way, he pushed and pushed Christina until he got what he wanted, and off to Jamaica they went. Okay, so this is what I'm saying. Christina, I totally get it. You know, that first love, it's blinding, and it's really hard to stay the course. But ladies, if there's any of you out there who are watching this, and you're in the relationship with somebody, and you think he's the best, but he's always asking you to do things that make you uncomfortable, or that are, you know, making you cross boundaries that you know you shouldn't cross, like going kayaking in an open sea with a broken foot, that person's not for you, okay? And don't be afraid to say, I think not. You know, have some self-respect. This person is asking you to endanger your life, one, by taking you to go do something he doesn't know how to help you do, because he doesn't know how to do it. But then two, you have a broken foot. Did surgery mean nothing to you? Have some self-respect and say, I'm not doing that. Well, he kept telling her there's nothing to be afraid of. What would he know? He's never done it. Sure enough, before they knew it, John and Christina were swept out to sea, the strong current pushing them quickly toward a giant boulder. Christina's poor foot would be broken again. Their kayak was about to split apart. John had forgotten to pack life jackets and spray skirts that would keep water out of the kayak. Truly, he knew nothing. No spray skirt? In open sea kayaking? Look, I don't know a lot about many things. Most things I know nothing about. But I know that. No life jackets? I don't think he forgot to pack them. I think he thought that wearing a life jacket would make it less risky, so less fun. Anyway, they were going to die. And then suddenly, a rogue wave. At the very last second, they were lifted up and over the boulder. And when it was over, with both of them pushed to a beachhead and marooned, Christina sat in shock while John paced and muttered aloud to himself, Don't tell Mummy. Don't tell Mummy. Mummy? Yee. So much for the fearless John Kennedy. The weird thing was the look in his eyes, like he was turned on. Dying, getting that close to it was a high for him. Well, that's kind of weird. How was he pacing and saying, don't tell Mummy, but yet his eyes looked as though they were turned on? I don't know, maybe the mantra of don't tell Mummy excited him because there was something he'd done that was so dangerous that he shouldn't tell his mother, and that's what continued to make him feel so excited? I don't know. But anyway, no wonder the other near misses, almost smashing into a 49-foot-long white whale in Baja, or kayaking straight toward the Staten Island ferry, or swimming far out into the ocean way past shore, hadn't stopped him. If anything, they electrified him. If he wanted to keep risking his life, fine. But why was he so insistent on risking Christina's? Why did he have to pressure other people into going along with his crazy ideas? Christina was a house cat, a girl who loved books and the theater. She was no athlete. But John told her, if you want to be my girlfriend, you're going to have to do things I love. Otherwise, it's not going to work out. She tried. After all, there were any number of girls, a lot of them famous and glamorous and sexier and more beautiful than she, waiting in line to date JFK Jr. Even after John had asked her to share an apartment for a summer in D.C., Christina had her misgivings. One day, she made a list of what she didn't like about John. He doesn't always tell me what his plans are. He can be tardy. He's a slob. He's spoiled. He gets annoyed when he misplaces things and expects me to find them. But he'd floated the idea of marriage. So we're seeing stars, ladies. It's goo goo gaga, you know? Marriage. My life doesn't begin unless I'm married. Ladies, please. It does, though. It does. Look, I've said this in episodes before when the subject of marriage comes up. Marriage is a beautiful thing. It is amazing. It's wonderful. There's so many great things about marriage. I've become such a better person by being married. But if it's not in the cards right now, don't force it because you're like, I won't be something until I am married. Or, I need somebody in order to go through life. I have to have somebody. I have to have a mate in life. I have to have a partner to do all the things. You don't, though. Especially when your option is this joker who just forced you into a kayak with a broken foot, and then you're sitting marooned on an island with no help in sight. Right? It's like, if that guy can float marriage all day long, what's he going to do on the wedding night? Stab you? I mean, who cares if he wants to marry you? You'd be better off marrying your dog. He teased Christina with a story about his recent visit to his mother at her weekend home in New Jersey and how she was so convinced John would propose. John said, "She got some things out of the safe." "What things?" Christina asked. "Her engagement ring." Would that proposal ever come? So poor Christina's over here, like, putting herself through the paces because she thinks that Kennedy is going to ask her to marry them. Look, here's the thing. I'm acting all high and mighty. I think to myself, as a young woman, if there had been a Kennedy available and he had picked me out, it would have turned my head for a second. But at what point in the dating situation will any of these people say, this isn't for me? Being treated like a cockroach, this isn't for me. No, thank you. But none of these people do it. And again, like I said earlier, if it was that these Kennedys were so smooth that they kept you in the dark, they treated you like a queen, like a goddess. You were wined and dined and treated as Majesty herself. They loved you. They wanted you. Everything was just 10 out of 10. Then I couldn't blame these people for getting confused. And then the media's over there telling you the Kennedys are the best family that ever hit the earth. Of course you would be confused, but this is my problem and my contention. I cannot recall even one story in this book in which any of these people were led to believe that the person that they were marrying, that this Kennedy that they were marrying, loved them. None of these people believed that. It was that they wanted to be part of the Kennedy family. But the person that they were involved with never gave them any indication that it was going to be a union that was a beautiful thing and that they would be sacred in that union. Hardly. They never hid their cards. What's happening, ladies? Okay. After that near miss, their crash landing on the beach, Christina refused to get back in the kayak. She and John had come upon a group of fishermen who'd offered to take them to the mainland the next morning and to share their food for dinner. Christina, for a moment, allowed herself to calm down. It'd be okay. Hardly. She's with John. It'll never be okay. "No," John said. "We're going to kayak back tonight. In the dark." What? They've made it. They're not dead. It's like, hallelujah, praise the Lord. No. Christina was near tears. John was stubborn enough to go without her and leave her alone with these strange men. "What if a wave hits us?" she asked John. "What if we capsize? I can't swim in that." John brushed her off. "It's our best shot," he said. But what were they? In an action movie? Their best shot was waiting for these experienced fishermen who knew this water to sail them back. "No way we'll wreck," John said. "I know I can turn the yak." Did he just call that kayak a yak? Break up with him right now for that. For that alone. He could have been a perfect person, but when he decided to call the kayak a yak, it's over. So off they went, exhausted and traumatized. John pushed off using his paddle, steering and counting seconds between wave breaks, but the swells were so much bigger than John had anticipated. The current was so strong, and they were losing control. Again. Suddenly, they were underwater. Christina felt extreme pressure. The brace on her leg was going to burst. She opened her eyes and found herself looking up at a blurry ray of sunshine penetrating the deep. They must have been 15 feet down. This is it, Christina thought. We're going to die. 15 feet down. Can you imagine the pressure in your ears? Her paddle was swept right out of her hand. She watched it float away. Her crutches were gone, too. The weight on her bones was like concrete. Somehow, miraculously, the kayak spun and broke the surface, only to be pushed underwater by another sudden wave, and then back up again. John was screaming instructions. "Bail! Bail! Find the bailer now!" The kayak was taking on water. Christina was crying. "There is no bailer, John!" she exclaimed. "How could you not pack a bailer? Where in the goddamn ocean?" And he's over there like, "F this! Use anything! Use your hands!" Her hands? She looked over at John, who was using his cotton baseball cap. Later, years after his death, Christina was still unable to remember how they ever survived. When they finally reached land, John tied up the boat like nothing had happened. Christina was shaking. "John," she said, "we could have died." "Yeah, Chief, but what a way to go." What a jackass! The very definition. John had given Christina valuable information that day. He had a death wish. It was strong in his DNA. She didn't know if he was even aware of it, and she couldn't allow herself to fully admit it to herself. John could be so tender with her, so sensitive. That was the John that she could never leave, and so disasters kept happening. On Martha's Vineyard, John took Christina sailing one raw February day to a remote island. They camped at night, and the next morning Christina saw the sign. Danger. He had brought them to a Navy bombing test site. When Jackie found out, she was furious. "You were with Christina," she kept saying to John. But nothing landed with him, not even his mother's anger. And lo and behold, later that very afternoon, John insisted Christina get on top of a Jeep, which he spun around at high speed just for kicks. This guy wanted to kill her. "I'm going to take you out on a kayak in these rough seas. Yeah, your foot's broken. We have no spray skirts, no bailer. I didn't bring life jackets, but whatever, let's try it. Then, hey, let's go camping on this island. That'll be fun." Then you wake up in the morning. "Oh, this place could have been bombed. I could have been blown to smithereens in the night. For all this guy cares." He didn't care. "Wow, that's kind of cool, isn't it? We camped on a Navy bombing site. Wow." And then that very afternoon, he's like, "Hey, why don't you get up on top of my Jeep and I'll spin it around real fast, see if you can hold on." I don't know what's going to happen if you let go, but let's find out. So this guy needs to be strangled. And the book goes, Christina hadn't planned for this. Well, would any of us have? She was wearing a brand new camel coat she just bought at Bergdorf's specifically for this weekend. It was the last one left, 2 sizes too big and way too expensive, but Christina loved it. Jackie would approve, and she wanted to impress Jackie, no longer Mrs. Onassis's, to her now. This was not the stuff of a genteel weekend with the refined Jackie O. "I can't," Christina said. John pushed. He leveraged her fear that this would be their last time together, having told her that he needed to see other women before he married her, and then telling her that she was too good for him, and that she had a calling, acting, and he didn't, and that he needed to find direction on his own. Alone. But then she would hear and read about the movie star he was seeing, Daryl. John and Daryl, they were all over the tabloids. But he'd always come back to Christina, sweep her off somewhere glamorous to talk about baby names. "Flynn Kennedy," he said to her. "It's got a good ring. What do you think about that, Flynn? You like that one?" See, this is what would be so confusing. Being like, "Hey, I really like you, but I'm going to need to see other women because at the end of the day, you're just too good for me. But, what do you think about Flynn Kennedy for a baby name?" I mean, the backwards and forwards, the ups and the downs. Get out of this, Christina. How could Christina say no to John in that moment? She wanted to, but she couldn't. After all, his hemming and hawing, his push-pull with her, he was once again talking about marriage and babies. "This'll all work out if I get to do the things I want, so just make sure I get what I want, and then, you and me, together, and our baby Flynn." And so John lifted her up in her brand new camel coat and put her on the roof of the Jeep and revved the engine, spinning it around faster and faster, Christina laughing and clinging on for dear life. Okay, but laughing? So are we having a good time, Christina? See, this is what I'm saying to you, something about this book. It's like, well, did she not want to do it or did she want to do it? I mean, I know there is that middle ground where you say no and then they keep bugging you and so then you say yes and then the whole time you feel like you were coerced into it. But like, at a certain point, your no has to mean no. It has to. Or else it's really hard later to be like, I was used and abused. Because you might not have wanted to do it. That's not a lie. But if you then do it, where at what point do you accept some responsibility for getting on top of that Jeep? Just because he said, "What do you think about Flynn, a baby name?" Again, I totally do remember being young and wildly in love and it really clouding your judgment. But, most of us are in situations where we're dating a guy and he always wants to see the movie he wants to see. It's like selfishness like that. Not like, "Hey, your foot's broken. Why don't we go kayak? I didn't bring life vest. I didn't bring spray skirts or a bailer and we don't know what we're doing, but let's go for it. And if you don't, I want to break up with you." Most of us have not faced situations where the selfishness was so brazen. The book goes on to say that he never really broke up with her. One of their last times together on the vineyard, John waxed rhapsodic about birds. "Hawks mate for life. When the male finds his female, he flies in circles round her, till he locks his talon in hers, and they lock in a death spiral, crashing to the ground." Christina was sure he made that up. True or not, it didn't really matter. John was telling her something else. "I'm too dangerous for you. For any woman, really." Wow, you're so cool, John. The line on John was short and spiky. Mama's boy. He did whatever Jackie told him. He gave up the dream he shared with Christina, acting, because his mother was grooming him for politics. Oh, what a fool's errand. Then he became a lawyer, but this bored him. And anyway, John, with his ADHD and constant need for physical excitement, was unsuited for it. He drifted and dated a lot, but everyone knew that he would only marry a woman that his mother approved of. Actresses, for some reason, did not meet with Jackie's approval. Could it be because one actress had once ruined her marriage? Daryl Hannah, whom John was seeing while still with Christina, was a movie star. Nothing softened Jackie's stance. It didn't matter that Daryl came from real money, or that the director of her latest blockbuster was married to Jackie's sister Lee, or that her family had deep connections to the Democratic Party. Daryl was flashy and bedraggled and in the news for all the wrong reasons, her relationship with singer Jackson Browne among them. John thought about marrying Daryl. When years later they finally broke up, everyone assumed it had to do with Jackie. Not so. Man, listen to this story. You want to talk about someone who doesn't value other people's property? The truth was, Daryl dumped him. It was early 1994, and Jackie was suddenly battling a very aggressive cancer. John had an even tougher time focusing now, and so one day, John took Daryl's dog for a walk, and when John wasn't looking, the dog wandered into traffic and got hit by a car, and was killed. Okay, can you imagine your jackass boyfriend taking your dog for a walk, letting it wander into traffic, killing it, and you coming home being like, hey, where's Spot? And he's like, oh, Spot's dead. I kind of lost track of him in traffic. Oops. Other people's things, other people's pets, even once his own. John once had a German Shepherd, Sam, that he refused to train. Sam had a habit of biting people, including one of John's young female assistants, who got it in the face. John put Sam down, and he just got another dog. God forbid he trained Sam so Sam not bite people in the face. Oh, is the dog bothering people? Because I didn't do my due diligence? Kill it. In sum and substance, the message was, he was JFK Jr., and everybody else, well, frankly, everyone else was not. He would board any domestic flight he wanted without showing his ID. He was often without his wallet anyway, or whatever ticket he needed for whatever gala. He was an editor-in-chief who had trouble with spelling and grammar, who had never managed employees or run a company. When George was at its most vulnerable, hemorrhaging ads and money and cultural capital, the publisher getting ready to pull the plug, John took off for 3 weeks. He left his number 2, a magazine veteran named Biz Mitchell, to handle it. She had no idea what to do. Why would she? Salvaging a struggling magazine wasn't her purview. She tried calling and calling John, but he never answered. And when he came back, he threw a fit that Biz, in way over her head, hadn't fixed everything. He said it was best if she left. Biz was dealing with a boyfriend who was fighting leukemia, and she never once used that as an excuse, never asked for special treatment, was nothing but a top-tier professional who had worked her heart out for John. But she agreed to go with 6 months' pay and a non-compete clause. This was the John the public never saw. Okay. Now here's the deal. As far as Biz Mitchell goes, if she's a magazine veteran, why wouldn't she know what to do, though? I mean, it says salvaging a struggling paper wasn't her purview. I guess, but of the two of them, why would you even call John? John knows nothing. Not even a little bit. Like, her disappointment that John wasn't picking up. Well, would John have any answers that you don't have? You've at least been in the magazine business. And see, this, I think, a little bit is what I'm talking about when I say that sometimes I feel like we're getting this picture painted of the irresponsibility of some members of the story, but then the other members of the story were like, yeah, it was so hard for Biz. You know, here she was, a magazine veteran, top-tier professional, and then John wouldn't help her run the magazine. Well, John's an idiot. John doesn't have any answers. So why are we acting indignant that Biz couldn't get in touch with John? What were we expecting John to say if Biz could have gotten in touch with him? You know? And so it's like it's just that kind of stuff where I feel like we're adding a punch to the story. And can you believe that Biz tried to call John, didn't answer? Yeah, I can't believe it. I can believe it big time. And what I can't believe is that Biz thought John was going to have an answer. Right. So, well, the rest of this particular chapter has more to do with Carolyn and less to do with Christina, because that's pretty much the end of that. I think this is a good place to stop. I'm going to try to keep these episodes about an hour long each, just so that it's easier to edit and then I can get more out at once. So this is the part 1 of the Carolyn Bessette story. The next time we come together, we're definitely going to focus more on her and less on Christina, but we definitely needed to get an idea of what John Jr. was like in order for us to understand what Carolyn was up against when she started dating him. But again, when it comes to Carolyn, you know, I will say that of all the women in the book, the author, Maureen Callahan, goes to some lengths to paint a more honest picture of Carolyn Bessette than she does seemingly to others. And I can only imagine that perhaps it's because she's a more recent historical figure, whereas some of these other people, you know, when we're talking about stuff that was happening in the 50s and 60s, some of her contemporaries aren't still available to talk to, you know, Maureen about. So we're getting, I feel like, a bit more of a glossed over picture, whereas with Carolyn, there's a lot more contemporary people to ask who knew Carolyn in real time. And so I wonder if maybe that's why we get a slightly more balanced picture. I don't know. But anyway, the next time we come together, we're going to continue to talk about Carolyn. It'll probably be 3 to 4 parts about Carolyn, because there's quite a bit about her in this book. But I loved starting this book out with you. Thank you so much for listening, and tune in for more. And then on Sunday, we will have another episode of the Mountbattens, as I know many of you are missing that series. So we'll pick that back up this Sunday. All right, good talking. Bye.